Hi folks, welcome to On the Mantle. My name is Gregory, and tonight we're going to talk about collecting decoys. We're going to spend time in two areas. First, we're going to talk a little bit about why to collect decoys. Secondly, we're going to spend some time on how to build your collection. So you've decided you want to collect duck decoys. So there's a couple things you need to consider. Number one, do I want to collect vintage decoys or contemporary decoys, or maybe you want to collect both. Vintage decoys being, like pre-1960. Contemporary decoys being contemporary carvers that are still alive and potentially still making decoys. So do I want to collect vintage decoys, or do I want to collect contemporary, or both? Next, you want to consider three things. You want to consider region, you want to consider style, and you want to consider specific carvers. Okay, so what's region? Region, so ducks fly flyways, right? And so there's the Pacific flyway, the Mississippi flyway. There's about I think 4 to 5 flyways anyway in the United States. Carvers carve the decoys of the ducks that flew those flyways. So maybe you want to consider collecting Illinois River decoys, decoys that were made along the Illinois River, or maybe you want to consider decoys of the Great Lakes. Decoys from the Delaware River. Okay, so that would be a regional decoy, a decoy that's specific to a certain region. Within that region, there are different styles. Okay, for example, a lot of the Illinois River decoys carved a rounded bottom decoy. You take, this is one of my great grandfather's mallards. You take that, for example. It's a rounded bottom decoy, vintage decoy for sure, but very traditional in its style. Okay, so you want to consider region and you want to consider style. The last thing is maybe you want to specialize in a certain carver. Personally, because I have carving history in my family, I collect my great grandfather's decoys and I collect some others, but maybe you want to focus in on a certain carver. Maybe even go a step further and maybe a certain species. Okay, so there's a lot of things to consider when you're starting your own decoy collection. Vintage versus contemporary, region, style, and carver. So now that you've decided on a particular region or style, now you got to kind of drop down a level and figure out how do I get started in terms of where do I even start. You're going to want to tap into a number of resources there. For example, you want to go to libraries, tap into their decoy books. Honestly, the first decoy book I ever found was in a library, and it was a great encouragement to me on kind of sorting through that whole region and style thing. So tap into your resources. Where can you get these resources? You can go to your libraries, you can go to museums, you can go to carvers themselves. You can go to organizations. Get out on the internet and Google, the decoy organizations. There's a Midwest Decoy Collectors Association. There's an Ohio Decoy Collectors. There's a lot of regional decoy collector associations that you can tap into that can be a great resource. And that's a good means to find the collectors themselves. Generally speaking, probably one of the best resources I found were the collectors themselves. They've got the books, they've done the homework, and they're also a wealth of information. Another resource is the carvers themselves. Sometimes you find if you're collecting contemporaries, the carvers can be a great resource just in terms of what to look for in contemporary decoys. Depending on the line you've chosen, they can be a great resource to guide you there. The vintage collectors are a great resource. Even the old carvers themselves, and sadly a lot of the old timers are dying off, but there's still a few around, and they can be a great resource to not only help you with maybe their decoys, but to help you with some of the other vintage carvers from years past. So let's assume at this point you've made the decision about, you got your decoy collecting narrowed down to region or style. You've kind of honed in on maybe a particular carver, vintage or contemporary. Let me give you a little bit of guidance in terms of value now, and I'm really kind of probably looking more directly at the vintage decoys. you're going to find with contemporary decoys, they have prices and they're pretty easy to understand. But with the vintage decoy market, the antique decoys, it's a little bit tougher game. And so this is where your studying and your homework is going to come into play. So let's assume you're all set, you've got all this knowledge, you're loaded up, and you're going to head out to maybe a decoy show, or maybe you're even going through a flea market and you run into a decoy. So now what? Number one, you got to be able to identify it. Or if you can't identify it, you have to be able to get somebody that can. One of the cool things about technology today is we have things like camera phones and so on. First of all, I'd recommend not to be in a hurry to purchase that decoy. That would be my first piece of advice, is because it can get a little bit pricey, and sometimes if you don't know if a decoy's been touched, if it's been repaired, repainted, before you step out and make a purchase on that, you want to get some help and guidance on that. So where do you get that? That's where you want to establish good rapport with other collectors. Pretty much in most of the flyways, getting around decoy shows, hooking up with these organizations, you can reach out to collectors that have knowledge, that can look at these birds firsthand for you. And so, like I said, if you're at a flea market, get the guy's business card, the dealer's business card, take a picture of that bird, and you can at least email it to a collector and get some input on it. I've done that before. So collectors can be a great resource for you to assess value and to do analysis on your decoy. Another one is the dealers themselves. Establish a good rapport with dealers. Understand what lines they carry, what type of region and carvers that they actually specialize in, because most of them do, and use them as a resource. The nice thing about dealers is they're constantly buying decoys, so they're good students and really good disciples on studying decoys, studying condition, so dealers are a good resource. Another good resource are the auction results themselves. Okay, so there's a lot of decoy auctions going on, a lot of decoy auction firms, and so they do constantly post their results, and that's a good means to collect and study values. So again, look for your particular region, look for your particular style, look for your particular carver, and use those auction results as a means to assess the value as well. So let's assume you did some work on value and kind of narrowed down a little bit about maybe what you're going to spend on a decoy. I'm going to really steer you to decoy shows, and here's why. If I go to a flea market, for example, and nothing against them, you can find a real treasure there every now and then. When you walk in the door, you're not walking in the door into a decoy show that has hundreds or thousands of decoys, right? The nice thing about a decoy show is that's all it is. It's all decoys. And so you're going to have a lot better selection, which is going to create a lot better competition amongst prices. So I'm going to steer you to a show. The other thing I'm going to recommend to you is even before you go to the show is to figure out your budget, right? Because if you get in the vintage market and you go with purely mint, perfect decoys, you better bring your wallet. I mean, the mint decoys are very expensive, and so you got to kind of right size your budget. Figure out what you want to spend. Do I want mint decoys? Do I want to, get into decoys that have been gunned and they actually had service? So decoy shows would be where I would direct you to. Another source for purchasing decoys are collectors themselves. If you tap into an organization that maybe a regional organization that fits your region or specialty a decoy, find those collectors and go visit with them. Jaw with them and just learn about and they may have decoys for sale themselves. A lot of times they do. So other collectors are a good means to purchase that first decoy or additional decoys. And then the last one, again, is dealers. Dealers, there are a good number of decoy dealers in the country and even Canada. And a lot of these folks start out to be collectors. And like anything else, your collection gets so big, before you know it, you got enough to become a dealer. So dealers are another good source of purchasing that first or maybe additional decoys. Okay, so now that you've maybe gone to a show and you've actually done some assessment on what you want to buy, there's really two things I want to impress on you before we leave. Number one is buy the best decoy you can afford. Honestly, I would rather buy one good decoy than two mediocre decoys. And there's a reason for that. Number one, if you stay with your decoy collecting, your appetite's going to increase. So, you may eventually move that decoy. But then secondly, it'll enable you to sell. You can sell a good decoy, okay? People don't want to buy junk. And so buy the best decoy you can afford. The second thing I want to leave you with is condition. And especially with the vintage decoys, this is paramount, okay? Let me give you an example. These are two of my great-granddad's bluebills, right? Okay, so this is about 1940, this is about 1930, but you can see the difference in condition on these. This decoy is all original paint. This has some overpaint, some minor, traces of overpaint, but then a lot of chipping, a lot of flaking, okay? So really, for all intents and purposes, this is the better decoy. I spent more money on this, could probably sell it much easier than this decoy. They both have sentimental value to me, but conditionally, this is the better decoy. So you really want to hone in on condition. And even to the point to where I would really count on the dealers to help you with that, and a credible dealer that you have a relationship with. Because to be honest with you, here's my caution. The touch-ups, the bill repairs, the work that the restoration people can do these days is hardly detectable. You almost have to have an expert, and matter of fact, a lot of the dealers actually x-ray decoys. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to x-ray a $500 decoy, but the point is if you're going to spend good money on a decoy, you want to make sure it's all authentic, and it's actually what they're selling it as, or what they're saying it is in an auction catalog. Okay, so be able and be willing to scrutinize these decoys for condition.
Thanks, Pat. Folks, this was our first episode of On the Mantle. Decoy carving is a distinctly American art form, and it's a great hobby. So get out there and have fun. Until next time, I'll see you in the decoy shed.